This is a 2007 Chevy Colorado two-wheel drive with a 2.9 in it, and it's got a problem with setting front wheel speed sensor, the ABS codes, a C0035 left front speed sensor circuit, and a C0045 right front speed sensor circuit. I went ahead and jacked it up, set it on a jack stand. It's got 174,000 miles on it. Took the wheel off of it. It's 19mm lug nuts. And I was going to test, see if the ABS sensor was hooked up and plugged in. It is. And I was just looking at the general condition of the wheel bearing. And it's pretty scabby. I'm just going to go ahead and replace the wheel bearing and sensor both at the same time. And those brake pads worn out. So I'm going to go ahead and take these 1/2-inch bolts out of the caliper. And set it up there. And I'm going to take these 21mm out of the caliper hanger. The pads were stuck in these noise suppressing brackets, so they need popped off and cleaned out from behind them. It's closing the gap up on the pads and making them hang up. They wore pretty good though, I guess. And I'll go ahead and start taking this ABS line off for the wiring. Squeeze these in, releases, and just pull them out of the. Just make note of the routing of the ABS cable. It's running behind the brake line. And there's the plug in. These wires are kind of delicate, so be careful with them. And just push on the connectors to disconnect it. It's got a pin to push down and hold both plastic parts and open it up. And the ABS is routed through over top of the control arm and down. It's got a 13mm here holding it, and a 7mm holding it on this bracket. So I'm going to pull that off. It's got a lot of loose. I'm going to blast this 13mm off. I'm going to hang this caliper with either a bungee cord or wire up here to the tower. Get that unplugged. And something I noticed, the rotor's rotten. It's just stopping with the center of it on the inside pad, and the rotor's just rusting out. It just falls away as the pad hits it, and you can't turn it out of it. It's just rotten. So it's going to get a new rotor and a wheel bearing assembly. And keep a hold of all the hardware on this ABS wire. You never know what will be missing from the replacement, especially on the aftermarket. And here the bearing's loose. These have 3 different suspensions on it. It's like a Z71 and then a ZQ85, and that's what this one is. And there's a left and right wheel bearing on top of that. I called a dealership with a VIN and then got a printout, and this is the Q85 suspension. It's like a heavy half ton, I guess. 6 lug nuts on it. It has 4 bolts holding the hub assembly to the spindle, and the 2 in the back I'll get with the wheel turned to the right, and then the 2 in the front I'll get with the wheel turned to the left. But then look, they're 15 millimeters. And I took a jack and raised the control arm up so that the weight's just off the jack stand, so I can get some clearance for that bottom against this lower ball joint. So the jack stand's still under it, but the control arm's still sitting on the jack with the weight of the truck on it, straighten it out a little bit. And I sprayed a little penetrating oil on the hub assembly behind the dust cover. Hopefully it'll have enough time to work in there and help it out a little bit. It's got some yellow Loctite on them. And I'll go inside and turn the wheel the other way, take the other 2 out. The bottom front one is going to take a little longer extension to get past the sway bar link bolt, and I use these wobbler type, give me a little hinge on it. Instead of going straight, it'll be tilted a little bit. The other way would be a ratchet against a socket right against it, and why use that when the impact's available. That's the bottom one. Went like a lamb. That one wasn't tight at all. Wasn't very tight at all. Didn't look damaged or anything. Now the fun part. If you're reusing the rotor, you might have to make a bolt nut combination off of the caliper support ears and screw the bolt against the rotor with a shim behind it so it don't tear the rotor up if you're reusing it. All this is getting replaced, so I can just pretty much take a sledgehammer and beat this sucker off there. I'm gonna give it a shot anyway. Just leave the cable hanging loose. It's got to feed through the back of the housing. The sledgehammer wasn't phasing it, so I had to just put a shim of metal across the back of the rotor and run a bolt nut through it. And then hold the bolt head and turn the nuts, let the bolt feed through the caliper ears and push against that metal plate, and that causes you got to do them both pretty even so you don't break one of them ears off. That's starting to move it though. Got a little gap in it now. That's the back brake plate shim dust cover. I'll probably spray some more stuff in there just to help it along. Once you get it moving, it ain't so bad. Sometimes if it doesn't want to move and you got a pretty good load on it, you just leave it set for a little while and it'll start popping. Looks pretty good. Got the back moving. I drove a chisel in between the inside of the tie rod end, outer part, and the brake shield there. I got the front of it moving. And I believe it's ready to come out of there. like an inch thick one. Go ahead and slip it out of there and feed that ABS cable through the hole in the back. Pay attention to your ABS wiring that is between these two upper bolts, and that the shielding will have an open gap for the caliper to set on it. Of course, the bolt holes are oblong, or kind of hard to mess it up, I guess, but there it is. Now I got to take some brake cleaner and dry off the WD-40 with the penetrating oil, and then wire brush that down and make sure the surface is flat, and take this cover and wire brush it down and make sure it's not got any raised up places, rust or whatever left on it. And now that it's out of there, slip this cover off. The concave part of the cover faces the rotor. And the ABS cable is kind of aggravating to let it down and bring all those bumps through it. It's really an outfit. Now that it's down out of there, I'm going to take these bolts that holds the rotor to the wheel bearing out and reuse them on the new wheel bearing and rotor assembly. If you just change the wheel bearing, you'd have to take these bolts out and get the rotor off of there and clean the surfaces up, make sure it's flat to set it against the new wheel bearing. They're 17 millimeters. I'm going to go ahead and blast them out of there. With any luck. They're supposed to be down to 82 foot-pounds, so it shouldn't be too bad. Yeah, it ain't bad. Just like a rear end ring gear, isn't it? Gotta be careful putting them back on to the new hub or whatever, and they'll have to be tightened down in a crisscross pattern so that it sets flat against the hub and doesn't jack up on one side, or it'll be a real problem. Got most of the scale off of it and the holes cleaned out all around it. And use either a ball peen hammer or tip of a chisel or punch or whatever, break the scabs off of it. Just make sure nothing's sticking up higher in between these holes that hold the wheel bearing on. It'll mostly be mounted at the holes, and you don't want any humps between them. And an opportune time to paint this metal before it falls clear apart. It's really not the best stuff in the world. And paint the back brake plate, the cover. And you can either work on the other side while this side's drying, or find something else to do. Got the inside of it too, from ball joint to ball joint. That'll slow it down for a little while, I guess. Already got the back dust cover painted, and I'll just let it dry for an hour or so before I start mounting it back up. On the brake caliper anchor, feel free to pop these noise suppressing shims out and get new ones, brake hardware, and then either use a file or screwdriver or whatever and scrape anything gristly or raised up out of these tracks. Feel free to paint it. with some high temperature paint, not too heavy, just enough to keep the rust down. And pull the slide pins out and degrease them, and then re-grease them with some Seal Glide brake lubricant if they need it, and sandpaper any rust or replace them with new brake hardware, the pins. I've got a new wheel bearing hub assembly with the ABS sensor for the left side. There's a difference between the left and the right. And I fed the harness to the center of the new rotor. Saves on a lot of cleanup and other useless information. So I just center the hub, let it drop down in there, and line up the stud holes. And I got the bolts out of the old hub and rotor assembly. And I'm going to put them in there. Make sure the rotor's setting flat on the hub all the way around. And run these bolts down in a crisscross pattern to about 15 foot-pounds. Just snug them down. Make sure the rotor's flat against the hub. If you're using a old grungy hub or rotor, you gotta scrape the surfaces that mate flat. I'm going to run them down in a crisscross pattern. And make sure you got the rotor sitting on at least a couple 2/4 on their side to support the sensor from getting damaged on the back of the wheel bearing. The back brake plate dust cover is pretty much dry from painting it. And you'll have to go on there in line with where the caliper sets. And then shove the ABS harness and the wheel bearing assembly through that. And then start putting the bolts back in the back of the wheel bearing. Went ahead and fed that dust cover onto the wheel bearing and the ABS cable through it. It's really kind of aggravating to feed all that mess through holes. But the curved part faces the rotor, open it, so it doesn't hit the rotor. Make sure none of it's got any dents or bends in it. It's going to hit the rotor before you get it up on there. I went ahead and freshened up the old wheel bearing bolts with some blue Loctite, all 4 of them. And I'm going to go ahead and feed that through there and start getting some bolts in it. The control arm's still raised up by the jack level, so I can get at this lower bolt underneath of this stabilizer stud. Once the rotors and wheel bearings installed onto the spindle and tightened down, then I'll be tightening the hub, the rotor bolts to their final torque. The open part of that dust cover faces where the caliper is going to be. And feed this harness through the hole. With any luck, and the ABS wire points up. Alright, almost ready. Line the holes up a little. And the dust cover is how alignment it is. Put all the wheel bearing bolts back in it and tighten them down to 90 foot-pounds. Be looking pretty good on there. Painted all around. A little chrome there. We're back in business. Feel free to unzip tie your new ABS harness and start routing it in. This one came with a new bolt for this corner. 2 ears that kind of snag around this top of the spindle. But it didn't come with a new nut for where it goes up to the upper control arm. So I scavenged it off of the old one. It does have a lock on the back to keep it from moving around. And get that in the slot and run that nut down. And the harness just went underneath of the brake caliper hose, the rubber hose. Have to go under it. And we'll lock in there, luckily, hopefully. Maybe not. Might either have to use the retainer off the factory, or do some adjustment to this one, or zip tie it. I'd rather have it holding the way it was originally. You may even have to recrimp these connectors or adjust the length between them. You just never know. I went underneath the brake line, rubber hose here, and this metal brake line, and then it'll snap back in. So those two holes there. Don't forget to tighten these down. Don't forget to torque the wheel bearing bolts either. You know, for 90 pounds, that seemed kind of easy. Like they could have took some more, but I don't want to push it more than a few pounds one way or the other. I'm going to have to use every one of the factory hangers if I want to route it back the way it was without rigging it with ties. Just kind of get on the open side of this and pry it open. It'll pop, and it's got a latch on each end that latches together and then snaps together. I'm just undoing them and then sticking them back in the frame in order they come off of the old one. They hold, the original ones hold good. I don't know what to do with these. Too much slop. I don't want to take all of them off. And make sure you plug your harness into the connector all the way and it snaps. At least these fit the hole, I guess. I'm snapping the last one. It's pretty tight. Follows that hole pretty tight around this, and keep it off of this stud. And then I've just been taking pliers and squeezing these back together, and they're biting on good. And that's doing pretty good. I might take some of this slack out, I don't know. See that? Might leave some in there too. This is a hinge point, so a little slack here, and then back here, this should be solid, and this can be solid. I have to have a little give here. Solid, solid, and then jumps over to the inner fender. I'll have to have decent slack. It does. It's good. Alright, on to the next step. Put the caliper hanger back on. And I've already took a C-clamp and compressed the pistons back into the caliper. if your master cylinder reservoir is too full, you might drain some off of it before it starts pouring down in here, before you push these back in. If it's more than 7/8 full, between 7/8 3/4. I slipped the caliper hanger on there, and I inserted the new noise suppressor shims hardware onto their seats. And these 21mm bolts tightened down to 130 foot-pounds. I've got the new pads. I'm going to stick them in there as a general rule. I believe that the wear indicator should be at the bottom, and these are a little aggravating. I'll stick it in the bottom, right on the outside edge at an angle. With any luck, and push down and twist at the end to lock it, or just to get this noise suppressor opened up, and then push the top over. Sometimes you might have to lift up on this upper one, or push down on the pad and lift up on this one. Sometimes these hangers will get warped and kind of contract or something. If that would happen, where the pad absolutely wouldn't fit in there with all recourse, and you'll have to grind some off the tip of the pad, depending on whether it's the width that's warped or the length. And just a lot of times you just clean the paint off of both ends and it'll fit in there. Sometimes the paint's too thick and that'll hang it up. Now I'm going to stick the pad on the inside, and I'm going to stick a punch in this rotor and tighten these rotor to hub bolts down to 80 foot-pounds in a crisscross pattern. If you're this far into it, give the rotor a little spin. Make sure the back brake plate cover isn't bent into it or anything, and there's no movement in the rotor now. But sounds like maybe the rotor's got a little warp in it. That's always special. But I'm sure it was in spec, barely. Meaty. Okay. Go ahead and tighten these bolts down. Okay, those are tightened down. Now just slip the caliper pistons pushed back. Be sure not to twist this brake hose into a pigtail. It's straight and comes over to the caliper. And tighten the caliper bolts down. 30 foot-pounds. Just look it over, make sure I turn the steering wheel back and forth and make sure the ABS cable isn't getting into the coil spring, or it's too short or too long getting into the sway bar or something. And I went ahead and pumped the brakes up to displace some of the brake fluid back into this caliper. And it looks like the captured rotor and wheel bearing assembly is in good shape. There's nothing loose. Everything's torqued down. Go ahead and stick the wheel on it. I'm lugging this tightened down to 103 foot-pounds. Should be back in business. Be sure and put the center cap back on, and it should be done.